Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It is the BJ Show for Tuesday, the 13th of May. It is a block we're started with, which means we're top of the show a little bit after 7 o'clock. That is John Combest. Good morning to you, John.
This is the Microsoft Support Center. Am I speaking to Brad?
Yeah, don't get me going on that. Every single day we do this show, Monday through Friday. I shouldn't say every single day, but every single day of his life for the past 23 years, John puts together this amazing site called johncombest.com. It has all the important things you need to know if you live in the state of Missouri. Even if you don't live in the state of Missouri, still important things you need to know. Now, he has dozens of articles every morning on his site, but what we do, we bring in this guy right here. What's your name again, sir?
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what do you do?
Now on with the countdown.
And we start off with...
In third place,
a hot topic in St. Louis social media uniquely involves a state legislator. A headline from the Post-Dispatch today. Mark Schlinkman reports, quote, illegal stunt driving pops up Sunday night in St. Louis. Cops spike at least 40 cars. If you're a Brad Hildebrand type and you drive around town punching buttons, listening to talk radio, you might have heard a Democrat state rep on the conservative 97.1 yesterday, the Mark Reardon show. He had frequent Mark Reardon roundtable contributor, Representative Steve Butts, the unfortunately named Steve Butts from St. Louis City, describing what was going on in his usually safe, usually quiet South City neighborhood. Brad, did you happen to see any of these videos on social media?
I did. Can I tell you, I think they're great.
Oh, I bet you do. I bet you love if they were happening outside your house at 1 a.m., right, Brad?
Wouldn't bother me. I could care less. Matter of fact, in my neighborhood.
Actually, Brad, you could care less, right?
Well, John, you're talking to a guy who has a bullet hole in his front window, so there's not too much that's going to bother me.
That's true. Okay, we'll get the story back to Steve Butts. And by the way, you couldn't care less, is what you're saying. Because if you could care less, that means you do care.
I could care less.
Oh, so that means that you do care.
It means that the inverse of polarization.
I got you, Brad. Well, let's go back to the actual subject of the story, which is Steve Butts. He posted on social media some videos that folks sent him. Now, Steve made it clear in the Post-Dispatch piece that the videos were not taken by him. He was not the subject of, he was not going out there doing firsthand reporting, but he was familiar with what was happening out there. And folks would do what are now called slide shows, beginning a little before 9 p.m. in the Holly Hills neighborhood. Again, traditionally a pretty safe, if you had to live somewhere in St. Louis City and you were a civilized human being, Holly Hills would be one of the places you think that maybe you could live without dealing with this sort of savagery. So you can see in the video, I did the firsthand, I guess maybe it's secondhand journalism here, Brad, and I went through the audio and I transcribed it. There was apparently a white man, I guess a friend of Steve Butts, was video recording some of this. And there were some young female scholars walking past him. And here's what some of them said. Y'all look, the white man calling the police y'all. Another good quote is, y'all act like y'all finna, and then it's unintelligible, I couldn't see. Y'all ain't finna make me blank. Y'all are outnumbered. And I guess the y'all there are supposed to be white people. You could see some white neighbors on their steps, looking at some of this circus-like, unique tribal behavior going on in the streets.
John?
So, yep.
John, let me interrupt you. Was Jasmine Crockett back in town?
She was back in town. I think I saw her, Brad. I think so. I mean, the extensions did not look like they were made of premium horsehair. They look like they might have been made of some sort of synthetic material there. And for those who don't know, Brad, you know what the word finna means. And I happen to not only grow up in Spanish Lake, but I took a class at WashU on Ebonics. And finna is generally the colloquial version of fitting to. So if you would say, I'm fitting to XYZ, that's shortened to I'm finna. So when this young scholar says, y'all act like y'all finna, and then something unintelligible. What she's saying is y'all act like y'all are going to do something about this, you know? So anyway, Steve Butts was on Reardon's show. I have a link up to Reardon's show, and then I have a link to the Post-Dispatch piece. Brad, to me, the really interesting thing about this is it was really in vogue for critics of Tashara Jones to criticize Tashara and the city and law enforcement efforts, things like that, and the lawlessness of the city when Tashara was in charge. But now we have a new mayor. Are people who are very critical about crime and criminal behavior and certain cultural elements, are those folks going to be loud still? So Kara Spencer is mayor? So far, it appears to be so, but I don't know.
I say those guys should go out to Ladue. That's where they need to go. It's nicer streets out there in Ladue, not as many potholes and things like that.
Generally not so many potholes. Or, Brad, a solution for this, if you live in the Holly Hills neighborhood and you've had enough, just move somewhere safer. There's a place called the Westplex in St. Charles County that's touted by Brad Hildebrand. You don't have a lot of donuts going on in the middle of cul-de-sacs at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night out in Cottleville. You know what I mean?
John, and we don't need traffic calming devices, so, we don't have those at the Westplex.
You don't even need bump outs, do you, Brad?
No, those bump outs. And by the way, I have to thank Jason Rosenbaum, who loves to take pictures of guys in construction vests, for that great picture he took with John doing his JohnCombest.com show live and direct from Clarkson Road yesterday. And you look great in a hard hat as well, too.
We'd also like to thank, on a serious note, Ben Keathley, who retweeted our show yesterday on the bump out section. So big shout out to Ben Keathley for that. Thank you, Brad. And thanks to everyone who retweets our show.
Yes.
You know who's going to love our show today? Folks in North St. Louis County. I'll tell you why in story number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
A triumvirate of news stories about the state's new radioactive waste testing plan. It was a bipartisan victory in the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate. Every single legislator in the Missouri House voted in favor of this radioactive waste bill. And here's what it would do, Brad. Previously, there was a cap on what was called the state's radioactive waste investigative fund. And it was developed to allow cities and towns to address possible contamination. In short, Brad, what this bipartisan bill does is it eliminates the need for it eliminates the requirement for a community to go to the state and have the state, Missouri DNR, Department of Natural Resources, look at possible contamination. Right now, after this bill passes, any resident who suspects that there could be radioactive contamination can contact Missouri DNR, and DNR can go out and immediately begin their own investigation. In other words, you're cutting out the hurdle of a local community having to get together and vote in a city council and make a request to DNR. In other words, Missouri DNR will be able to move more quickly. Now, another element of this bill that was pointed out by the progressive blog Missouri Independent, their content creator there named Jason Hancock, he quoted St. Charles' own Nick Schroer, who says he wants to make sure that the responsibility of cleaning up this contamination always belongs to the federal government. In other words, no amount of this $150,000 the old cap, no amount of the money that's in this radioactive fund will ever be used for actual cleanup, because that is the federal government's responsibility. So we have a good bipartisan piece of legislation here. The Post-Dispatch piece calls out specifically Rep. Tricia Burns. She's been the tip of the spear on this on the Republican side out in Wentzville. Nick Schroer was in the Missouri Independent piece. Doug Clemens, who's a Democrat from St. Anne, is in the Post-Dispatch piece. And St. Louis Public Radio's intern, Evie Lewis, also did a piece on this too. All 3 pieces are up today, Brad.
Now, what's that guy's name again?
His name is Ricky Schroeder, I think, Brad. Okay. That's what you call him.
I know who you're talking about now. Okay, Ricky Schroeder. Okay, I got it. Okay, we're ready for number 1?
We sure are.
The number 1.
Brad, a few days ago, we talked about school choice, and we talked about how in the Missouri budget, there's a little bit of money set aside for what are called education savings accounts. And critics of these scholarships We'll call them vouchers. One Democrat in the Missouri legislature voted in favor of these scholarships. You know, they give kids the opportunity to go to private schools, and it is using taxpayer money. And you've pointed out, Brad, a lot of teachers and teachers unions obviously don't like this. They say that it's taking money away from public schools and giving it to private groups and religious groups, and we can't have that in the state of Missouri. Well, one Democrat, Marlene Terry from North St. Louis County, voted in favor of a bill that included these education scholarship accounts. In fact, Brad, Marlene Terry, point of fact, represents the area where both you and I used to live. She represents Spanish Lake, that Glasgow Village area, you know, Bell Fountain, Neighbors, that area down through there, North St. Louis County. So it was controversial, you know. Marlene Terry voted with Republicans on a few of these type of issues in the last legislative session. And Democrats were not happy about this. Afterwards, Representative Marlene Terry was stripped of her committee assignments. Now, Representative Terry, of course, wasn't fond of getting stripped of her responsibility, representing the people of North St. Louis County on some of these committees. And she distributed a press release quite critical of the House Super Minority Leader, Aune. And she even pointed out, hey, you know, in this most recent budget, why did Kansas City Democrats get more than $50 more in earmarks than those of us Democrats in St. Louis City and St. Louis County? Ashley, that doesn't seem right, does it? But Brad, I'm burying the lead here a little bit. This piece is brought to us by the Whispering Gallery, which is put together by Jake Kroesen. He's the editor of the Missouri Times. You know, that's Scott Fawn's founded publication. And in the Whispering Gallery, Jake reports, and he's the only one so far to report, on something that happened in the members-only lounge. According to Jake, and according to a source, Representatives Raychel Proudie and Kimberly Ann Collins reportedly confronted Minority Leader Aune in the members-only room. And Proudie allegedly shoved Aune during the exchange. Now, Brad, I'm not going to ruin the rest of the story because this is in the Missouri Times newsletter, and we're not going to give it away for free. I do have a subscription link up on my website. If people want to sign up for the newsletter, they can click that link if they want to see what happened in the shoving match. So I anticipate that maybe other mainstream outlets might cover this in the week to come, or maybe they'll ignore it, Brad, because it's Democrat on Democrat conflict. You don't want to report when members of your own team are fighting with each other, do you, Brad?
John, I'll never understand this whole school choice thing, which always bothers me because of the fact that we have choice. If you decide you want to go to Aldi's, you can shop at Aldi's or Schnucks or Deerberg's, whatever. But yet you can't decide where your kids get educated. And I have a simple solution for this, which is, you know, amazingly simple, but nobody will ever listen to me. They think I'm some weirdo when I bring this up. You know what my solution is?
Does it have to do with teachers can only teach in the district in which they live?
And they can only shop in the district in which they are employed.
Nah. Now, they can't shop at Aldi's because there's no store called Aldi's. There is a store called Aldi. But you're saying they could only shop at Aldi or Schnucks or Deerberg's, and they couldn't shop anywhere else?
No, only in the districts. In other words, like if you were in the Hazelwood School District, you taught there, you could only shop at the Schnucks there on Lindbergh or the Deerberg's there in Lindbergh, cross the street from Royce.
Oh, I see. They wouldn't like that very much, would they, Brad?
Well, and you can only go to the bars in the area, and you couldn't go to any Cardinals games or any sports activities because that's not in your district. And pretty soon they would go like, well, this isn't fair. And they go, well, guess what? Neither is the way the school system is set up. Just because you live in that area, why can't, the whole thing to me, I wish I could find this thing. I can't find it. I told you this little meme that someone sent me, and it showed like these four little panels, and they were like side by sides. They were like four little, they weren't cartoon. They were actually pictures, and they showed like 1920 on the left, and it showed people like horse and buggy, and then it showed 1990 or 2020, and it was like it was showing like 100 years difference. What happened in 100 years, and it shows on the right side, it shows people in like a sleek, it might have been a Tesla. Okay, and then they have the same thing. They have another picture, from something on the left and something on the right, and you see this drastic drastic difference in 100 years. And then you have the fourth panel, which is school, and you see a woman in front of a classroom with a kid having a hand up, and that's 1920. And then 2020, it's the same woman, but she's dressed obviously differently, and she's in front of a classroom, and the kid's got his hand up. It's like, okay, for 100 years we've done things the same way. Why doesn't education change? You know what I'm saying?
Well, this message is not brought to you by the Missouri National Education Association, right, Brad?
John, I told you the story. Did I tell you this on the air? I can't remember what I told you.
Can you be a little more vague? What's the story?
I went to the Hazelwood School District's teachers open house. Did I tell you that story?
No, I don't think so.
I went back I think it was in January. This was an event where they were trying to get people to essentially become teachers, and not only become teachers, but as like a second career. But they were trying. Is this where
you applied? You've told the story several times. Is this the same story where you applied?
Yeah, and
oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And it was unbelievably difficult. I mean, I'm not trying to, once again, I'm not trying to make
You have
it sound
multiple
like
advanced degrees, Brad.
Exactly.
Including a worthless journalism degree from SIU Edwardsville.
2 worthless journalism degrees. And I can't teach. But the bizarre part of this is I can be a substitute, and in a lot of the districts, especially in Hazelwood, because I know a couple of people that work in Hazelwood District, they have permanent substitutes where they are so short of teachers. They have substitutes that teach a class, like in grade school, a class, and in the junior high or middle school and upper school, senior high, they teach, a particular subject matter and multiple classes. And they do this year round. It's going like, okay, explain me the difference. And not only that, God, don't get me going on this.
Maybe if you're a permanent substitute, Brad, does a permanent substitute have to pay dues to the National Education Association?
I don't believe they do. I believe...
Ooh, that's a pretty good deal then, right?
Mainly because in the Hazelwood School District, the substitutes are not employed by the district. They're employed by Kelly.
You're right. The Kelly Contracting Group. You're right about that.
Right. You go through Kelly, and you're essentially an employee of Kelly, and Kelly places you with the Hazelwood School District, which, once again, I'm going like, okay, why don't they just hire people direct? I mean, don't they have enough administrators where they can hire part-time teachers?
I don't think so, Brad. I mean, they're not giving Brad Hildebrand a job. You should go. I heard that your plan was to go to SLU and pay 20 or 30 grand for a teaching degree. Wasn't that your plan, Brett?
No, there were two different people out there. It wasn't SLU. It was UMSL, and it was somebody else. It wasn't. I don't think it was SLU. But yeah, it would cost me about $25,000 to take the classes and get my certification. And the bizarre part of it is, after you start the classes, you don't even have to complete the classes. You can start teaching like within a couple of months after starting the class. So I don't understand it. I'll never understand it, especially in grade school. Okay, how tough is grade school to teach? How tough is grade school math to teach? 2 + 2 = 4. 4 + 4 = 8. Why do you need an advanced degree or any kind of degree to teach that? You know what I mean?
I think it should all just be done by AI, right, Brad? You could probably have an AI teacher. You could go to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT would tell you what to do. And I know we're up against break, Brad. An event that we haven't gotten to talk about. And real quick before we go, at the end of this break, there is the Vitae Foundation, which is a pro-life group that has presence in many states, but especially strong here in Missouri. They are having Riley Gaines in Columbia, Missouri next week, Wednesday, May 21st. And you can read about it. You can find the information by going to Vitae Foundation. That's VITAE foundation.org. Click on events. Brad, it's amazing. I looked again this morning because I've been looking for the last several days. I follow this group on Twitter. Amazingly, Brad, there's no mainstream media coverage about Riley Gaines coming to Missouri. Can you imagine if we had that guy Leah Thomas coming to Missouri?
Whoa.
Can you imagine how many stories we would see about it, Brad?
Whoa. You mean to tell me stlouispr.org doesn't have multiple stories about Riley Gaines coming to the mid-Missouri area?
You would think she would. You would think KBIA would be on the case. You'd think they'd have a daily countdown, Brad.
I was just going to say, they have their reporters in Columbia, their KBIA. Can't they share stories back and forth?
Yeah, shockingly. Now, truth be told, if there are protesters there, I bet there would be a story about protesters next Wednesday night. Anyway, Wednesday, May 21st, go to vitaefoundation.org, click on events, and you can see more details about that event next Wednesday.
Okay, we have to take a break.